All right, now we're recording, and I'm going to spotlight my video. All right, so I'm going to start with Raul this time. Raul Palma is an assistant professor in Ithaca College's Department of Writing. His work has appeared in the National Quarterly Review, Chattahoochee River Greensboro Review, Sonora Review, Smokelong Review, and elsewhere. He's at work on a novel titled Hunting in Hialeah Gardens. And is that what you're reading from today, Raul?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said, is that where you're reading from?
Oh, where? Oh,
No, yeah, that is what I'm reading. That's what I'm reading from today. Yeah.
great. Just let me spotlight your video here, and then you can get started.
Awesome. Hey, thank you all again for making it, for coming out. So this is just these are just the first 3.5 pages from this new project. I've been working on it now for about a year, and you know, it's been a joy finding time to get going with it. So hope you enjoy it. Opening to A Haunting in Hialeah Gardens, Chapter 1. It was Christmas time in Miami, and Hugo hadn't been sleeping well, because every time he tried, he'd feel his indebtedness drop into bed with him, this invisible thing. Sometimes it would take hold of his hand, kiss him, then wrap itself around his chest so that it hurt to breathe, or it would slap him awake and demand attention. It was impossible to sleep. It was impossible to imagine a future. He lived in an efficiency. When he sat at his table drinking tea, he could hear the murmur of another family through the drywall. In the morning, it was an espresso machine, the sizzle of bacon. The children whined, fought, laughed, dribbled basketballs. It made him feel like he lived in a real home. From his window, he'd watch them, all in public school uniforms, march across the street at 7:05 a.m. to catch the school bus. Wild, little, rambunctious boogers. He'd wanted to be a father. Children were not in his cards. He was broke to begin with. There's no doubt about that. Even beyond financial ruin, he was unfixable. All he could do was adapt. So he learned to toss retail magazines directly in the garbage. He learned to take pleasure in regrowing celery or lettuce on his windowsill. For work, he alternated between 3 outfits, which he mended frequently. And for breakfast, he drank tea and ate a single boiled egg each morning. His only splurge on Fridays, he'd drive to La Cajareta and order a $2.50 café con leche, prepared by Barbara, the eldest of the workers. He always kept a quarter on him for the tip. All in all, this amounted to about $10 per month, enough to buy a gallon of his own milk and a bag of Butelo coffee. But Hugo needed this extravagance. More than the coffee, Hugo appreciated Barbara. He thought she might even be his friend. When he was around her, he'd smile and make jokes. Something of her age and her temperament reminded him of his own madrina from years ago. And because it was Christmas time, he'd bought her a little present. And after a night of terrible sleep, he'd gone to see her even if it wasn't a Friday. The present was nothing extraordinary, just a candle from the Botanica he worked at, and Hugo had wrapped it using gift paper he'd found in Melly's closet. It was nice paper, blue with white snowflakes, and even though Melly used to do all the wrapping, he did well wrapping it on his own. At the counter, Barbara greeted him with her customary, "¿Qué me dice?" She slid his coffee over, then said, "Wait a sec, Hugo. It's not Friday. What's the occasion? Got your days mixed up?" "I wanted to surprise you," he said. He was about to give her his holiday gift, along with a kind note he'd written, wishing her and her family a festive Christmas, when his phone buzzed and rang and startled him badly. So Hugo excused himself and looked at the unknown number, and he wondered, should I answer it or should I let it go to voicemail? And feeling the joy of the season and a sense of optimism, he set Barbara's little gift down atop the hood of his car and answered, "Hello? Good morning. Is this Hugo Contreras?" The voice sounded familiar. He didn't like this one bit. He wanted to hang up, go on with his day. but he was never any good at walking away from a question. He'd been raised to be respectful, accommodating. So he paced around the parking lot and said, "May I know who's asking?" "Alexi Ramirez, attorney at law." And hearing that phrase, it sent Hugo way back. Him and Melly curled up in bed, the murmur of Ramirez's late night commercials carrying them off to sleep. Hugo needed to get confirmation. "Are you Alexi Ramirez from Ramirez and Associates?" When the voice responded, "Yes, that's me," Hugo took Barbara's gift and walked off, even if he hadn't sipped his coffee or paid. He paced around the lot, weaving in and out of parked cars. Then he paused and whispered, "Alexi, do you know who I am? You ruined my life." Before Alexi could respond, Hugo continued, "Let me tell you something. You gotta stop calling me. What do I gotta do to get you people to stop fucking calling me?" Actually, he yelled all of this and more, even with some cops in spitting distance. Hugo's indebtedness, which had been trying to latch onto him all day, slunk to the ground and pooled around his feet. Hugo stomped through it, yelled more, kicking it, dispersing it. It felt for just a moment as if he'd actually conquered it once and for all. To his credit, Alexi didn't hang up. He waited for Hugo to stop yelling. Then, like someone used to being despised, he proceeded to delicately explain why he'd called. "There's something in my home," he said. "I can't describe it. Would you please hear me out?" He said other things too, about Hugo being recommended to him by Lourdes, excellent compensation, possible debt forgiveness. Hugo took Barbara's gift, sat in his car, and said, "Tell me, why should I help someone like you?" In Miami-Dade County, most people remember Alexi as the traffic ticket attorney with the bus bench ads. It was something unfortunate to stare at during the monotony of rush hour, though it gave Hugo and his wife Melly something to laugh about. The ad was so dramatic, like a bad yearbook photo. Alexi, fat, bald, posing with his clenched fist under his chin, an angry bald eagle squawking wildly behind him. It was the kind of face that made you want to stop your car and doodle something inappropriate all over it. But what could Hugo say? When Melly got a ticket going 15 over the limit, it was Alexi's firm that got her off with a small fine and no points. And there was even something of the jingle, how it'd play incessantly during television commercials. It was so memorable that when Hugo least suspected it, he'd sing, "Alexi Ramirez from Alexi and Associates." But Alexi was no longer a traffic ticket attorney. It took Hugo and Melly quite some time to notice when, in 2015, Alexi's bus bench ads began to deteriorate or bleach in the sun. Those that remained scattered through the city were in bad shape, marked up with mustaches and penises. Melly noticed first. "Where'd our friend go? Mira, Hugo, the ads are disappearing." She was so shocked that she called Alexi's traffic ticket clinic right then and there, while sitting in traffic. She put her phone on speaker so that Hugo could hear the, "We're sorry, you have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service." "I don't believe it," she said. "We need to find him, bro." "Ask Siri," Hugo said. "No," Melly said, "not him. We need to find his face." In rush hour, they searched Miami. It was nonsensical. Something about finding Alexi had infected them, much in the way that searching for a lost set of keys can drive a person mad, even when the keys are in their pocket all along. It was clear to Hugo that finding Alexi's face meant something more to Melly, and though he grew tired and hungry, he persisted until they did find one of his bus bench ads, completely intact. No mustaches, no penises, just a piece of gum on Alexi's nose, which Melly easily scraped off with her fingernail. In plain sight, Melly, who was such a joker, said, "How do you think he'd look with hair?" Then, using a red permanent marker, she proceeded to conjure up a trendy little hairdo, all spiked up in the front. It was ridiculous, yet it brought Hugo and Melly such joy to deface him. Afterwards, they said their goodbyes and for years forgot him, until the phone calls started. Hugo would be out with Melly, usually at Isla Canaria, eating Cuban food and making fun of their newly elected orange-faced abomination of a president, when Hugo's phone would go off, even if it was 7 p.m. on a Saturday. In those situations, Hugo would pretend that he didn't hear the ringing, that he didn't see the phone vibrating off the table, that he wasn't aware of the patron staring, wondering, why doesn't he just answer it? He'd cut into his steak and continue speaking to Melly like it was the most ordinary thing. But even that made him uncomfortable. Back then, Hugo's indebtedness was like a mosquito splattered on his car's windshield. It annoyed him, but only mildly. It was easy to ignore. It only took a little bit of blood. Hugo knew about the statute of limitations. He knew there was no reason to pay the $2,000 he'd defaulted on during his 20s. He knew that the original creditor had long ago sold the debt to a third party. The creditor had written off the loss to reduce the tax burden on significant profits on other accounts. It wasn't like he'd taken money from another individual. He'd taken from a corporation that had anticipated in its plan that some debtors like Hugo would default. This is to say, and so that it's quite clear, Hugo had zero remorse. He did not feel guilty at all, but he hated the phone calls. He hated how invasive they were. Melly would pretend not to notice, and Hugo hated that he was putting her in that situation in the first place. That one time she'd taken his phone to put it on silent mode, he'd seized it back and said in public, "Don't touch my phone," with such a force that Melly looked as if his words had slapped her. His words made her cry. How he wanted to simply be free of his past blunders, to go about life with nobody hounding him about debt, which is why, one night, after he'd looked at his savings account, he answered the call. He was in bed with Melly, watching reruns of Mr. Bean and eating popcorn, and when the phone started buzzing, he seized it and said, "How can I help you?" Melly acted surprised by his boldness. Immediately, some message played about the phone call being an attempt to collect a debt. He had to wait for an actual human to come to the phone, which angered him. He'd imagined all this time that it was Alexi Ramirez himself calling. He'd hoped to settle the debt man to man. When the line went back to an actual human, he let the debt collector have it. "Hey, jerk, it's Sunday night. Don't you have a life?" The young woman on the line said, "Sir, I'm sorry to bother." "Sure," Hugo said. "I was spending time with my wife, you know." "Is this Hugo Contreras?" "You know perfectly well that it's me," he said. Melly smacked him, whispered, "Yo, you're making too much noise." He took the call to the kitchen. "I'm calling you regarding your Bank of America credit card debt," the woman said. I know. Can I just pay it right now over the phone?" "Of course, Mr. Contreras. How much will you like to pay?" Hugo told her that he'd pay the $2,000. He gave her his checking information, and he asked her to mail him a receipt. That night, he jumped back into bed with Melly, and he felt liberated, exorcised of his past financial missteps. Even if he'd blown through half of his savings, he kissed her, climbed between her legs, and told her what he'd done as if he'd conquered a mountain. "That was so stupid," Melly said. "We could have taken a vacation." He disagreed. Being debt-free was worth it, until he received his receipt in the mail. It showed that he still owed $12,476. The law firm had calculated 16 years of high interest, and they'd tacked it onto the debt. He called, incoherently disputing the amount and refusing to pay. It was a crime what they were doing, he thought. Yet they sent him to court, and the judge ruled in the law firm's favor. The statute of limitations had reset when he'd made a payment. By the end of the year, Hugo's wages were being garnished. The little he made at the Botanica was now less. With the high interest, Hugo knew he'd never pay off the debt, and it angered him. How the missteps he'd made in his life could haunt him forever. He didn't want to talk about it. Melly wished he would. Maybe Hugo could have forgiven Alexi for that mess. But when he and Melly experienced the hardship of their lives, Alexi came for them all over again. Melly was gone, and the phone calls were becoming incessant, this time for another kind of debt. Hugo had, without fully realizing it, co-signed on Melly's hospital bills. Through the wake and the funeral, he ignored the calls. He wanted to stay in the present, to say his final goodbye, and to remember Melly in all her radiance. When he left the cemetery on that Saturday morning, he got home and checked his mail. There was a certified letter from the law offices of Alexi Ramirez and Associates, the only piece of correspondence. Hugo opened it, and what he saw weren't numbers or figures. He just saw one word, collect, which seemed in that particularly dark moment to be an attempt on his soul. He drank too much that night, or not enough, because when he woke up the next morning, he saw Alexi's court summons again, and sitting there across from him where Melly would always take her coffee, he felt his indebtedness as hot and as bright as the Florida sun. And in that one moment, when he confused it for Melly, it flared and scorched every bit of hope and optimism right off Hugo's body forever. Thank you all.
Wow. Okay, wonderful. All right, let me put the spotlight back. And We will have a Q&A time after the second reading, so after Robin reads. And wow, so get those questions formulating, and let me read Robin's bio here. Robin Carstensen, she, her, hers. Poetry manuscript In the Temple of Shining Mercy received the annual First Place Award by Iron Horse Literary Press in 2016. Her poems are recently published in Voices de la Luna, Fiolet and Wing, an anthology of domestic fabulist poetry, and many more. She directs the creative writing program at TAMU-CC, Texas A&M, where she is senior editor for Windward Review, a literary journal of the South Texas Coastal Bend, and a co-founding senior editor for Switchgrass Review, literary journal of health and transformation. So please allow me to spotlight Robin, unmute Robin here, and we can't really give a round of applause, but yay, Robin.
Thank you. And I see that Tina is here. Tina Lentz is a former student, and Abigail Keegan is here, and Tom is here, and Ian is here. So thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you, Alan and Christy, for having me. And Raul, I really enjoyed this story. Certainly it resonated with me on so many ways. Oh my gosh. But I mean, wow, it's really powerful. So I'm just going to read two poems. And the first one is, I'm going to start off light, but it's about Hurricane Harvey. So I'm just going to move right into it. And the title is Lines Left on I-35 to Rockport After a Stormy Breakup During Hurricane Harvey When I Said You're Too Intense. A towering metal boathouse leans out of the drenched prairie dunes like a widescreen shot of World War II. An aircraft carrier's flight and hangar decks bombed out, hanging in shreds. After the eye had glazed past Corpus Christi Bay, glaring into Rockport Harbor, nestled beneath the canopy of green oaks, hunched into the marshes and mudflats, it had sliced through their heads, heaving its serrated Category 4 rotary wings over their stout trunks, now scratching the sky, gaunt gray limbs, cavernous space above their chests, cracked open, mouths split wide, warning the whooping cranes not to bring their young. RV parks stubbled the highway edges, homes on wheels digging in, a random one overturned like a beached whale in their midst, another one uprooted in the next camp and the next, rusty wheels strangling the air. The marina crumpled across Aransas Bay, a floating rookery of masts, piers, appendages strewn, flattened pastel houses on stilts knocked off their game, roofs crushed in, shingles torn, wood beams felled, pilings of clothes, household splinterings, cable wires snapped, swung low. A light pole, as if he pushed over the edge, leaned into a yellow house across the street, its lamp head stuck into the roof like an axe head. The whole retired harbor dredged up, bedraggled, exposed. No matter, we were too old for drama. The gulls still hovered, laughed obscenely, anchored on the spoils. That ramshackle bait house with the shrimp tacos and mango salsa to die for, where you eat outside with a margarita on the rocks and a salty breeze, still stood. So that's that one. Okay, and we're gonna do thanks. And then I'm gonna go ahead and get onto the next one is called Waiting in Line for Gaia. And it kind of takes, and it's trying to kind of write about the pandemic. We're in the middle of it. I couldn't even write about it for the first few months. I'm kind of a slow writer that way. I need that distance. But not really, but we're in it, and I was trying to find, just as I wanted to explore it. So I kind of found a way. I was thinking about kind of exploring it from a distance, as if, so I'm taking it from the perspective of a persona who is in a, is no longer here and is looking back on the life on Earth. So that's the perspective of the speaker. So waiting in line for Gaia is just like waiting in line on Earth, trying to circumvent the proper channels. I remember having left just when I started to see the explosion of whiskers above Paisley's white tuxedo trickling to his chin, and the two black oval marks on the littlest terrier's backside, like two tiny continents that had joined, and tracing them often with delighted eyes and hands. Delight like a flutter. Her name, Snooky, after a petite person who entertained from a place called New Jersey. I had adopted her from a person I love who left her and me, yet we're still a family in a way. I remember wet face, chest heaving, jagged rocks called agony, the leaving and the left. But I still loved waking, the new sun in my house, sweet mules, barks, grackles in the bluebird bath, forgetting sorrow to the yellow and red-chested warblers lighting the hackberry trees, the squirrels doing frolic, one of many words we could call it, along the transmission wires, their bushy bodies gripping the bird feeders fiercely, which amused me, human, clenching everything, and the mockingbirds jostling in. And my friends, one dearest one of our 60 Earth years together, a teacher of yoga, the healing arts. A month we called April, a plague, orders to shelter in place. We could leave for work, groceries, exercise. We rode to the children's park on the bayfront, fitting for our love of play, rewinding every movie we watched for years to catch the subtle kernels of wisdom, we called it, to laugh, to wax esoteric, to burst your chest like a feast. We lived for it. I see him standing, his left leg draped over his blue clown bike beneath the palms, the light post following the hill's curved path, flattening behind him, each lamp a disco ball lighthouse. The nightclubs of our youth, his shaved chest, my leather suit and top hat, Jello shots, music from an artist called Prince. But under the palms, I am perched on the picnic table. Families dot the concrete path. A parent wears a mask while jogging, pushing her bundled child in a stroller. The plague still far, but hurling its way from the edge of New York, its vagabond shoes, those little town blues. The melody splits your heart. We were quiet as mystics. The whole earth knelt in biblical mourning, but not yet our shores. Flugelhorn gulls floated in gray steamship clouds. Rocks vibrated like reeds, ushering the tide in a Henry Mancini orchestra. I remember Corpus Christi Bay, suspended in the chamber-deep horns and Lujan waves, before the pendulum swung our way. No, I barely remember I was a teacher of my native tongue, of beauty, of tension. I had joined a resistance, writing letters to the powers, to city judges, administrators, governor of the Wild West myth of the folks, an affectionate diminutive word for the commoners, which was all of us, good folk, frightened in our way, a feeling we couldn't speak much of while we put on a good face, and so focused, a marvel, one of my favorite words. We stayed as long as we could for awe, each one of us, to be of service, to be worthy, to put on a good face. Oh, just wait, you'll see, you'll see. And that's it.
Wow.
That was waiting in line for Gaia.
Very,
So beautiful.
so beautiful. Okay, so I'm about to hit the button to allow people to unmute themselves, and I just did. So please, if you have a question to ask, you can either ask our authors by unmuting yourself, or you can type it in the chat to make sure the chat's going to everyone and not just one person privately if you want to ask everyone a question. And I should also say, while people are formulating their questions, just to put this out there, next week we have Suzanne Warren and Christy Maxwell. So Cincinnati reading, and it should be really special as they all are. And so come and hear them. And we also have Suzanne Warren with us right now. So I don't know if she wants to ask a question or what. Anyway, like I said, open it up for questions.
Raul, I was wondering that you, I'm Tom Murphy, I'm sorry. You said this was a larger piece. Is this a part of a novel then?
Yeah, it's part of I'm thinking of it as a short novel. It's falling in the range of about 70,000 words.
Cool.
Hey, thank you.
I liked it a lot.
Thanks so much. No, I appreciate it. It's so fresh, so it's lovely to share it.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I loved your reading, Robin. That was beautiful. I was struck by so many images, and in particular, this idea of like the plague kind of in New York, right? Like I forget what unfurling, or kind of I forget what the right. But you know, I grew up in South Florida with a lot of storms, and it reminded me. I don't know, something of that reminded me of the language of storms, or. But I wrote down so many, like, bursting from your chest like a feast. Yeah, it was powerful.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that. I don't have a question.
Really. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Raul. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I noted that bursting of the chest as well. That was a really kind of one of those gripping moments too. And I really like the Harry Mancini aspect too. That was really cool. And the dancing bit there and everything with the music, you kind of get that feel.
Oh, thank you. Originally, back in April, it's kind of right. I was writing it kind of from a moment, and I had written something, just a couple of lines. I was thinking about Henry Mancini and Lujan, and just the sound of a Lujan, and like the Big Lebowski. You know, that score of it's actually, the song is called Lujan from Henry. It's a score in the Big Lebowski, and I just love that, and so I just had a couple of lines of that, and originally that was at the very beginning, but it was way too dense to start with, and so I moved it down and really expanded on the other, kind of themes in there too. So thank you.
I have a question. I have a question for Robin. I noticed that both of these poems are very, I guess, specific to Corpus Christi. And as a former Corpus Christi native, I was like, oh my gosh, you can see all of these images. For context, I don't live in Corpus anymore. I actually don't even live in Texas anymore. But my question is so much of your work seems rooted in place. So I'm wondering how you see the relationship of place to mining the interior thought, especially since a lot of your poems do seem to strike kind of universal feelings. So it's like, how is that different writing it in Corpus Christi versus somewhere else?
Wow, what a question. It's great to see you too. I mean, Tina's a former student. So great to see you. Talented poet right here, I have to say, Tina. So good to see you. question of, yeah, I do tend to write about place, I think, because I mean that's where my human body is located, in the material world, and that's the materiality of this place. It so shapes, you know, my reality, our realities. And it, I guess, too, my place, because I often write about, you know, Texas or Oklahoma. It's just like there's such a you know, such a, you know, of course, all layers and layers of like history and culture. And then, I mean, and then the political trauma, you know, I mean, I've been writing a lot more about that too. And then, I mean, but we're talking, and then they're, you know, like bombarded with political trauma, and then there's a hurricane. And then, I mean, just, so yeah, I think it's a rich, you know, writing about places such, especially a place like this, but any place you live, I mean, there's going to be that rich layers of culture, history, the politics, all of that. I think it's a rich territory to mine. And but I don't know if that's answering some of your question. But I think place is such a, it really does shape so much of, you know, who we are, and the challenges that we face, you know, the suffering and the joy and all that. You know, all of it combined. And so I hope that gets that to your question a little bit.
Yeah, if I could jump in, as Christy pointed out, that's also really heavily present in Raul's work too. Raul, would you kind of address the place question, and maybe as kind of Robin's also bringing in time and politics and like current events and stuff, like how does that influence where you are in your headspace when you're writing, and what makes an end and why?
It's really funny. You know, I grew up in Miami, right? And a lot of my family lives in Miami, and I have a hard time going back, just because I find it really, you know, part of it, I enjoy going back. You know, I don't want to sound ungrateful, right? But also, whenever I'm back, I'm like, I need to get out of here, like right now. You know, like, I need to go. And I mentioned that, right? Because when I was in Miami, I didn't write about Miami, you know, and then I moved away, and I was like, I'm going to write about Miami, right? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And, you know, when I was growing up, the neighborhood I lived in had, there was a lot of available space. There was a lot of open space. I lived next to, you know, my playground was an electrical field right next door. Right. So we used to like just play under the electrical wires, and, you know, God knows, you know, what the repercussions will be of all of that. Right. But you know, it's as simple as now when I go back, right, like there's a fence, right, and there's a no trespassing sign, right? The elementary school that I went to, I used to just kind of go through the fence, play basketball there, right? There are fences, they're locked off. It seems when I go back that a lot of the, if I'm going to end, it seems like public space is kind of disappearing. And if we're going to do anything, we got to pay for it. We got to go to the mall. We got to go to South Beach, which involves paying a lot for parking, right? And I say that in terms of writing, because something that dawned on me in another project that I was working on was that while those realities, I guess, exist in Miami, right? There are these demarcation lines. There are, you know, everything's become, you know, property, you know, politics, all of that. When I write, I could do whatever the hell I want, right? Like if there's a fence, I could just kind of climb it, right? Or I could have my character just go right through it, you know? And I think that's powerful. So I think this is a long way of saying, I think the work that I do when I write about Miami, right? What I'm often really conscious of and trying to accomplish is I'm trying to really challenge a kind of dominant structure or dominant narrative. I'm trying to kind of expose it and kind of come at it, right? Like critique it, in the hopes that it'll, in the hopes that, you know, the narrative will maybe invite people to imagine the space differently, right? To think about it differently. So that's a long-winded answer, you know. to all of that.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we have time for one more recorded question, and then if, whoever wants to stay and chat, we can do that. But let's have maybe one more recorded question for our authors.
For both authors, do you feel that like the pandemic has actually given you more time to write?
Right. I guess for me, I had a little bit more time in the summer because I didn't teach, although I was super busy also setting up courses for the fall and doing a lot of the what I call hours and hours of unpaid labor for the university. But I did make it a point to set aside time and with workshops with people, on the East Coast and the places where I would have had to travel. And there was a lot more opportunity to work with poets and writers from different places. And I made it a point I was able to write a lot more. I was. And but now that I'm teaching a full load again, I'm right kind of back into that. It's just so difficult. And I tell my students, I have to make a schedule. This is your schedule for writing. Carve it out, protect it with your life. And I'm struggling to do that myself, to like carve out that writing time and protect it with my life because it matters, and we tend to let everything else encroach upon our writing time. So I'm struggling to just make sure that I protect that time. And so the series like this, where you've given us the opportunity to come and share our work, I always find myself wanting to make sure that it gives me a chance to really look at the work again and revise and write. So it's really important part of the writing process is getting to share. So thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm up in Ithaca, New York, and when Ithaca College had its spring break, I was like, yes, I finally get to write, and I started writing. And then I think it was Thursday when things just started going south around here. Or not really, Ithaca never got too bad, but things started closing down. And once that happened, it took me a while to kind of acclimate at home. And there was about a week where I started writing again. And then all of a sudden, all the institutional juggling, right? Ithaca College instituted a whole bunch of summer courses to try to increase retention and also kind of create a nice foundation for students coming into online learning. So we got involved with that. And it was just one thing after another. And it seemed to not let up. There was a lot of baggage, right? And it hasn't been really until maybe just about 2 weeks ago where it's felt like there's maybe a little time is beginning to open up, and weirdly it's with the beginning of the semester. So summer has been this long unpaid experiment of tons of service and work, but things now weirdly are slowing down a little bit. Hopefully it lasts.
Like I said, we're gonna go off air, and if you want to hang around, if you can, if you have time, and if you're a reader, answer more questions. If you're someone else, ask more questions. That's fine. But I do want to take this opportunity to remind people that next week we have.
Oops. I can't hear you, Alan.
Sorry, I went off there. On the 23rd, we have Suzanne Warren with, I think she writes fiction essays, and I think she writes poetry too. So who knows what she's gonna read for us. She's here. She might answer that herself. And then also we have Christy Maxwell, who's very well known for her poetry, and so please make plans to come and hear them read. And thank you very much for coming. Again, If you're here right now in this present minute of time and you want to hang on, go ahead and hang on. I'm just going to stop recording.